really, really nervous. I'll have a bad batch of the hiccups right before a sermon. Has yet to happen, but it's been a thing that I've been worried about for a long time. I have planted the seed. Well, you know, what you gonna do. Good evening, all. It's good to see everyone here this evening. Thanks to those that came to share in the planning and all those different things, and also it's just good to discuss. We're gonna, I don't know, this kind of format's a little more free form. I'd mentioned last week that it's trying to find a balance between ones that aren't very well known. Last week we covered a couple in Luke that were unusual in a way, but also ones that are very well known. We're going to balance that out tonight with one that could be, it's in the top 3, if not the most probably well-known parable, the Good Samaritan in Luke 10. It's so ubiquitous, it's a fun word, or ubiquitous if you prefer, that it's entered the common, I'm going to use another word, parlance, the common usage, the common zeitgeist, the things people say. They'll use it kind of like David and Goliath as an example, or various other ones, to describe generosity in various things. It actually has a negative connotation in some cases where there are, though some have had to be repealed for varied reasons, Samaritan laws, which will prosecute you for failing to help someone, although liability becomes a whole thing. It also has to do with a liability protection. If you're trying to help someone in good faith, you can be freed from certain things. So it's an idea of being generous and helping one's fellow man in the general norm, which is a part of what Christ is talking about. But it's important to remember it doesn't appear in this conversation in a vacuum. It's actually in answer to a question. And there's a lot more to it that has impact beyond, and I'm not trying to take away from the idea of helping your fellow man, but the responsibility of one who is a child of God or someone who is claiming to serve God and how they regard their fellow man and the responsibilities there, and how the Jews in the first century were failing in that way in many senses. So it's probably one you've looked at before. A lot of the things we're going to explore you may have heard before, but I want to open up some other things and questions and go from there. So that's where we're going to be. It's in Luke chapter 10, verses 30 through 37 is the primary text. However, once we're piecing through some of those things, we are going to go back and deal with the context a little bit as well. So we all kind of together-ish on that place? All right. Luke 10. This is one that's unique to Luke, unlike some, and I'll be reading from the New American Standard of 95. Jesus replied and said, so he's replying to the question that was given to him. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among robbers, and they stripped him and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. That's the inciting incident. It's just one verse. There's so many other details, but they don't really matter. This is the thing. So, and by chance a priest was going down on that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite also, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan who was on a journey came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion. That word's important. And he came to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. And he put him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn and took care of him. On the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I return I will repay you." Verse 36, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands? Which is, going back to the original question, and the answer is, and he said, the one who showed mercy toward him. Jesus said to him, go and do likewise, or the same. Go and do the same. All right. Be nice, guys. Help people out. I think we're good. No, there's a lot more inside here, actually. So what kind of elements, what things stand out in this parabolos, this parable? All right, you said, oh yeah, I'm just going to say victim, because he's never identified more so than a man, okay? Okay. Priest, and I'm going to say and Levite, but there's a minor distinction, but they both set up. Triads are powerful things in storytelling, so that's possibly part of what's going on there too. Who else? The Samaritan, our hero. I will call him Sam. What? The innkeeper. Okay. That is true. He actually leaves this guy on the innkeeper's care on credit, in essence, at a certain point. I mean, he pays ahead, but okay. In terms of figures, the only other real figures in it are the robbers. But there's also I'm going to say J to J, the road. And going down to Jericho is correct. Jericho is in this weird pit in everything. It's below sea level. Old Jericho and then rebuilt New Jericho, though it took some time because that fulfilled prophecy to get there. So we have all these different things. We have the bandages. So actual physical manifestations of trying to help the guy as opposed to just kind words or, oh man, bummer, dude. He's taking physical care of the wounds. You have the payment made in money for the thing, and the beast, yeah. That was possibly, here's the thing. I'm gonna include this one other element that might sound strange, but I'm trying to think of how to describe it. I'm gonna put job in the sense of the Samaritan did have a goal. He had someplace he needed to be that was going to possibly be late for or interfered with in order to help this man. Is that done? Okay. Okay. I'm going to put oil and wine up here with that. Yeah, they healing properties and pain relief and various things. Honey would have been good too. Okay. True. Yeah, okay. The Q's and the A's that are going to be a bigger aspect of this. Again, this is one that's been adapted. This is one that's been discussed. This is one where like, yeah, we know all these things. But why? How is it possible for someone to get robbed on the road? It was. Yes. He is describing something that happened at the time. Highway robbery isn't just a figure, it was a literal issue. It was less prevalent during Pax Romana, the Roman peace, mainly because the Romans, for all their brutalities, their greatest interest was order, because that was to their pride, and they did not like brigandry. They would rather tax the people themselves than let someone else do it. So there was a surprising deal of travel safety in that time, but it still wasn't perfect. And the road to Jericho was known as one of those that had a lot of blind spots and places to jump out and hit people and various stuff. The Romans didn't tend to police isn't really a term because they used legionnaires, but outside Jerusalem it was a little more treacherous. All right, so he's robbed. They strip him down. It's always been an interesting question of why you go to that kind of trouble. There's different thoughts. It's not explained, but it could be a dishonor thing. It could also make him harder to interact with for someone because, well, this is going to be awkward. I don't want to have to help a guy that's, is it the guy's fault? No. They beat him. They leave him half dead. What is the implication, the expectation, perhaps, of what the robbers figured would happen to this guy? He just bleed out, die from exposure, various things. Why didn't they just kill him then? That's an interesting.
Because then you killed him.
That's.
Like, I didn't kill him. He was fine when I left.
That's. There's a possibility there. It also could just be the blitz speed of the attack, that they just wanted to get the stuff. And the idea is to beat him down is to make him, incapacitated and unable to resist so they can take his possession. So he's beat down, he's on the side of the road, and if it's one of the mountain roads in Jericho, maybe not a very wide path. It's not like you're going to miss him on this space, and he's visited. Like I said, storytelling involves a lot of triads, so having 3 total fits, but there is a subtle possible difference between the two. But who comes by first? The priest. Why, this is going to be one of those opinion think things, so not right answer, but why do you think Jesus might have selected a priest to be this first example? Okay, a religious figure. So what would one expect this vaunted religious figure would do in the midst of a horrible situation? You went to like the next step of it, but yeah. Wouldn't you expect this paragon of virtue, the one you elevate, perhaps, to be the one that would show service? And again, I'm getting ahead of the fact that this is an answer to a question about fulfilling the law, and the people who were you had the Pharisees who were the legal experts that could tell you the law, but if you want to have people who embodied some of its fulfillment personally, it would be the priest class, because they were the only ones that were allowed to do so in certain elements. But he avoids him. And as Eric brought up, what motivation might a priest have to avoid that situation? He would become unclean. Well, that's interesting, because what if it was his son? So this is where we're going to get to the equations here. What if it was his son? His brother?
Jesus gets on to them, you want to follow the law, but if it were some other set of circumstances, you wouldn't think about it.
Yeah. They were very duplicitous. And this is it's all going to hinge on a particular word we're going to head toward. But it was his son, his brother, a fellow priest, maybe a warrior priest, like a ninja or something. But would he just leave him there? Would he risk being unclean for his own son? For someone he knew, someone he cared about? Probably. So that defense becomes a little more flimsy, doesn't it? Oh, I might become unclean. I might become, dirtied under the law. And that is a religious argument, ironically, to avoid service to someone who is dying. Think about it. I see. So those people are going to miss out, or you could just maybe get another priest. By that point, ironically, they kind of were, because there were so many. It's kind of funny, actually. It's been suggested when John's dad was serving in the temple that it might have, there were so many sons of Aaron by that point that unless you were like of the cadre, you did your service, but it might have been 2 or 3 weeks of like your entire lifetime, and then you were done. You just fulfilled it and you were done, because there were bunches of them by that point. But he's not of the son of Aaron. Yeah, well, let's talk about the second one. What is a Levite in comparison with a priest? Okay, of the lineage of Levi, not just a fan of the genes, he's of the family. Now here's the old adage that was ingrained into me by Warren Wilcox years ago. Every priest is a Levite, but not every Levite is a priest. Every priest is a Levite, but not every Levite is a priest. Levi had the priestly or religious serving tribe, and that goes back to Numbers. Tradition held that the eldest son would be the priest for the family. That was the case for a very, very long time, even up until the giving of the law. We see this with Job. We see this with Some others, that first son, well, after the 10th plague and the passing over of the lentils and various things of those, God avoided. He basically purchased the firstborn sons from these families. And when they did a census of everything, and when they worked out how many people there were in terms of firstborn sons and then the number of Levites, they were pretty close in number. So he purchased the tribe of Levi in place of the firstborn sons with there was a minor difference, and they settled that account. It's very bizarre. But now the Levites would be that. But it was the family of Aaron and his descendants, eventually through Eli until he died, and then it moved to a cousin in his lineage that were the priests. But you had three distinct families outside. Well, he was part of one of them, but in their extended ones, three different brothers broke everything down to temple service. Some were in charge of putting up and down with the tabernacle. Some were in charge of the equipment involved. There's all kinds of things that goes to the nth degree. Once they built the temple, those people weren't putting it up and taking it down. They were in charge of maintenance and various other things, and a lot of times possibly even other activities involved with some of the music services and things that they did. So a Levite is in this kind of weird position where he's not of the family of Aaron, so he can't be a priest, but he's also not of the other tribes, so he serves. Some of them also were spread out throughout the country in different regions at a certain point, and were supposed to theoretically teach the people, though that kind of went out of style over time, and they just kind of... Anyway, he's not a priest. Why doesn't he help? He's one of the helper people. That's true. If he's unclean, he can't go in the temple. He can't do any of that work. But again, these are people that ostensibly were supposed to be responsible in helping the people with their spiritual needs. What about their physical ones? There's kind of they can't put a hand out. Dawn?
They know, and they know what they should be doing, but they're not doing it.
Yep. Here's the thing. Look at the way it's phrased. Passed by on the other side. What is the hope in their brain? Not my problem. It's a somebody else's problem situation. Yeah. That was actually a thing in a humorous Douglas Adams book where scientists created what they called the somebody else's problem field. You could put it on top of something and people would literally walk over it without seeing it because they just didn't want to deal with it.
That road was so treacherous and so long and arduous and traveled a lot. So aside from the religious significance of the priests and the Levites, there was common travel, there was common dangers inherent in the travel.
Mm-hmm.
And if you traveled without your protection, you brought it on yourself, so to speak. And it's pretty common for those kind of things to happen, bands of robbers and so on.
They were pretty...
Those things become so common that they're just generally avoided. You can't cover everything.
That's true. There was a lot of robbery that happened there. The way Christ sets it up, they don't have a guard with them, and they are traveling the road. They're taking that risk, but there is an element to that. Aside from the religious component of being unclean, they might be thinking, oh, this guy got hit. Best not stay around and make myself a target. Self-interest again. So who stops? Oh, a Samaritan. I think we're kind of familiar with it. We should cover it. Why would a Samaritan, if these guys are on the top of the food chain socially, why are the Samaritans on the bottom of the food chain socially? They're below Gentiles, by the way.
They were mixed breed.
Of coming from where? What is their history?
When the northern 10 tribes were conquered, they took out the Israelis and they brought in everything else.
Okay.
And they left the lowest of the low there. And they intermixed. That became the Samaritans.
Okay. Yes, with the Assyrian take of the north, and it's happened a little bit with the south, but the region in the north is where it became that area. The tribes saved Judah and Benjamin in the south were all largely either put to death, taken as slaves. But there was always that poor underclass that would even got missed in the midst of a war and various things, or ones who were brought low after the destruction who had to just get by in the land. And yes, one of the things the Assyrians did and the Babylonians did as well, and would do more, is there's a reason they would take the population of Judah, for instance, and take them over to the shores of Babylon. Is when you conquer an area, you can kill everyone, but if you kill everyone all the time, you don't have much of a worker class, or you don't have, you have your slave class, but no one's producing anything, and you don't really get any much profit from it. You can go in and pillage and take everything, and there are hordes that did that too. But really, if you want to conquer a people, you want to leave people, the production and going. But if you leave them in their own area, they're more prone to revolt. So you pick them up, move them over here. Take the people from here and move them over here. They brought in a bunch of other nations, a mix of them, into Israel. And then, yes, they would eventually, as time progresses, intermix with the locals there. Some of them whom, after generations of time, would kind of forget their own identity to some degree until the return happened 70 years later. They might say, hey, you guys are something. We were like you, but they were rejected because worse than being a Gentile is a half Jew. Except for, say, Timothy. I never really understood that because he's not a Samaritan. But fine. It was something about that particular class because they're in that land that was so offensive. The other thing is they would then band together and create their own system. They worshipped up on the mountain, Gerizim, I believe it was. They developed what was called the Samaritan Torah over time, which the whole history on that is kind of bonkers. And apparently, generations later, there were supposed to be a small group of them still alive, like 40 of them left, that still did this particular thing in the region. Not sure how they've fared lately, but it's weird. So, does it have anything to do with their character or their person or the type of heart that they have? Being castigated, does that have anything to do with it? Just their birth.
But within the context of this story, you have to remember the characters in play are the ideal
Mm-hmm.
compared to the lowest of the low,
Uh-huh.
the most offensive class possible within the Jewish audience.
Yeah. And see, he's not an expert in religious matters. He's not even a part of the family. He's been excluded. All he is on a journey, I guess it says. There's an implication in one translation that he's traveling. The word journey has with it a certain merchant element to it, but it doesn't even have to be that. But he's got a beast with him, which implies he's moving something. He takes care of the man. Now the irony is, this man, if he was conscious, his reaction might have been to be upset if he was a Jew. But there reaches also a point to where when you're dying, yeah. So he bandages him up. He pours oil and wine on them. So there's expense being given here. He has provisions with him. Why? Christ doesn't explain. It could be that he was prepared for problems on this road. Maybe you traveled with those kind of things, which would make sense, like a first aid kit in your car, because you have an issue out in between towns. You're not calling 911. You're taking care of it. So there's that. And then he gets him to an inn, which is probably the closest that he can get to, like a bed, a safe haven for him, because he's on his traveling. This is the thing. Imagine you're on your you're not a local. He's not local to this area because it's not Samaria. You're on a vacation and you come across someone, and now you got to help them in a town you don't know. What do? And he covers the expenses. Fair enough. Take care of him, and whatever more you spend when I return, I'll repay you. Sometimes with these things, there's always those little questions of you just, more details. You're like, I wonder what the innkeeper's reaction to all this is. But
I heard it explained one time that, why would the innkeeper believe him? But it sounded like, he overpaid for the keep that he was having then, probably to make sure that the innkeeper had enough self-interest to take care of him so that he would get maybe overpaid again and be.
Yep, he gives 2 denarius, or 2 denarii. A denarius was a day's wage. I don't know what the running rate at inns was. I don't think there's a comparison chart in there. I mean, if you're paying more than 1 silver piece, you're overpaying, but that never mind. You can be well rested. Anyway, it probably wasn't an entire day's wage, but maybe, because you got to account for the fact that a day's wage is supposed to cover your day's expenses, is the idea. Or at least it's more than getting just your daily bread, because otherwise you'd starve. This is what you were given, typically. He's giving 2 days' wages worth to cover just the room. It's definitely more, 2 is more than 1, but I'm betting it's still more than even what the rate would have been. And so you're right, he pays up front. So it's like, okay, money talks. I'll see how this guy's doing. If you're the innkeeper, that kind of puts you in this odd position. It's like, I hope he comes back, because I really don't want to be changing this guy's bandages. But if it's interest in it, and the plan is, whatever more you spend when I return, I'll repay you on the next, take care of him, whatever more you spend. I don't think the idea is necessarily that he was just disappearing. He was just probably taking care of what and when he's coming back to cover, to make sure. See, he doesn't just pick the guy up, get him to town, and drop him. He sees it through, and he wants to make sure this guy is restored, at least back to some degree of health. Can he replace whatever the guy was robbed? No. But that's not the most important thing. He's helping him in his life. Now, here's the question about it all. Christ is setting up something with this whole thing, but I'm gonna ask something first. Any of the 3 men, the priest, the Levite, the Samaritan, were any of them under obligation legally to do anything? I'm seeing heads shake. Why not? Okay. Well, here's the thing, and this is what I was going to say. In terms of the given general Roman law, probably not. Under what they had turned Jewish law into, most definitely not. But I want you to remind you before let's go back up to what set this all up. There's a number of things in this chapter. Let's go back up to verse 25. A lawyer stood up and put him to the test. Okay? So this is becoming, ironically, a legal question. That's why I asked about the law. A legal question. Teacher, and he, does he use didaskale? Okay, he just uses the general term teacher. He doesn't say rabbi. He doesn't try to butter him up. Okay, that's fine. Sometimes they do. What shall I do to inherit eternal life? It's an interesting question when you put it in those terms, because while the gospel phrasing is similar to that in terms of the we inherit it in terms of that we become justified and those things, the way he's phrasing it makes it sound like more of an earning element to it. But Christ does what he usually does with the didactic method. He tends to answer questions with what? Questions. And the legal scholar loves this, because then he can be like, oh, look at me. Although this is a fundamental question in their theology. He said to him, what is it written in the law? How does it read to you? He's actually wanting him to make a conclusion. How do you read it is literally the phrasing. He doesn't necessarily want this man to quote something at him just bleh. He wants him to give information and then give an answer. But verse 27, and he answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. What is that? Those are the greatest commands. Love the Lord your God, 1. Love your neighbor as yourself, 2. Upon this is built the entirety of the law and the prophets. Because really, you can distill down any command in the old law and the new that fits those. It just comes down to how far you're willing to go to try to fulfill them. If you love God with everything, you're going to try to figure out what he wants you to do in terms of worship, in terms of life, in terms of different things. You're going to seek those things out. And all of those vertical elements, say of the Ten Commandments, no other God before me, don't keep my name holy, all those things, you wouldn't do it because if you loved him. Love your neighbor is the horizontal, the other 6 of the Ten Commandments. If you love your neighbor, you're not going to murder him. You're not going to commit adultery with his wife. You're not going to steal from it. But it's more than that. And this is what Christ is trying to elevate up, and he does it in the Sermon on the Mount. Remember, this was a legal question. Is his answer wrong? No, but as is many times the case when you get into discussion of legal matters, this is true in the secular world, the code can say something. It can actually be pretty clear about it. It usually isn't. We're really bad at writing laws because they're written by politicians. That's because of the legislative system. That's how it works. But even if you have a very clearly defined statement, what lawyers spend a lot of time arguing over is the interpretation or the application of that statement, right? Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. That's going to be the love your God part is going to be a problem that they're having. We're going to be really focused on the second. However, you can't love God and fail to love your neighbor. They are necessarily connected too. He says, verse 28, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. It's interesting. Christ says, yeah, okay, what you said is true. Do this and you will live, quoting what God told him. But it doesn't seem enough for the guy. It's like, really? But I thought you were the great teacher. You were going to give me a little more information. So he asks another question. And this is what sets up the entire parable. And is it wishing to, what's the word? Justify himself. He knows something's up. Oh, okay, I need to meet this code. But I want to make sure I do it. Now, let's talk a little application here. I want to make sure, let's be clear. We need to define terms. There's nothing wrong with that. We do that in class and various things. We need to define some terms here. Who is my, what's the word? Neighbor. And we go, well, fool, your fellow man, duh, get with it. This would be a pretty profound question at the time. Because what would be the common answer of the Pharisee, lawyer, general member of Jewish society? What would be their answer to whom their neighbor was? I guess who, because it's still the subject. What? Their fellow Jews. Interesting, considering the nationality of the man is never stated. It's never stated. I would submit that he's probably a Jew, because if he were a Gentile or a Samaritan, that would add a whole other kink to the problem. But it's never stated. He's a fellow man. That's true. It shouldn't matter, but they might quibble over it. That would be a question they might bring up. Well, who's my neighbor? And think about it. What's the word mean in colloquial English? Guy next door, person who lives next to you. It's one in your physical surroundings. Now, that term is kind of lost a little bit depending on societal shifts and different things. Knowing one's neighbors versus knowing one's neighbors, and it can be difficult, especially with the way modern things are and people move a lot and various things. But it's still this localized idea. To them, they're very tribal, and I'm not meaning that in a negative way. Their inheritance was tied to a particular area. Now, it got kind of skewed post exile and coming back. And that's probably what led a number of them to take on differing professions, frankly, because you can't work land that's not yours anymore or that you don't have a claim to. You always needed blacksmiths, you always needed carpenters, you needed fishermen and those different jobs, but under their society, the key, especially along the line of the male heir, was the land, and the land was everything. And if it got sold because you had to sell it in various things, a jubilee would happen and reset everything. That was the way it was supposed to be. We talked about that a long time ago with Ahab and Naboth's vineyard. The reason Naboth's vineyard was so precious to him, even if it was just a little vineyard, is because it was his inheritance in the line. So your neighbor was part of your clan in that tribe and possibly kin. I mean, it got a little more cosmopolitan with Roman rule, Greek influence, various things, but it's still, were they going to call a Gentile trader passing through their neighbor? Were they going to call a Samaritan their neighbor? I mean, they're physically up the road. When they settled in a different city, because they were more living in Alexandria than Jerusalem as much because of the diaspora, they still tended to gather into quarters. Sometimes that was imposed. A lot of times it wasn't. Who was their neighbor? Their own. There's a certain natural tendency toward that, especially ever since Babel, but it had some negative things to it. They broke into their particular groups, but they needed to break out of that. They needed to bust past that.
When they were filming the movie The Planet of the Apes, one of the actresses noted they had gorillas, orangutans, and chimpanzees, and they all had full bodysuits on, and at lunchtime they'd take off the headpiece and just have lunch. Just taking off the whole thing was too inconvenient. She said, I noticed gorillas ate together, chimps together, orangutans together. Even though they may have been male, female, different races, they naturally segregate.
Oh, that's...
Makes them feel comfortable.
Oh.
It's natural.
Okay, there's a certain social aspect to that, but he's wanting to move them past that.
That was the message.
Who is my neighbor? Well, going down to verse 36, which of these three proved to be a neighbor? Now, notice, Christ isn't defining in terms of location even. He has shifted it from, is it someone you're close to? Is it someone you know, someone you don't know? It really comes down to who was the neighbor? Proved to be a neighbor, which implies action that goes with it. Who one proved to be the neighbor to the man? The one who helped him. Now, you'd think that would be in a different direction. And who considered this man they went by to be his neighbor? That's the natural question you think it would lead to. The priest didn't think he was his neighbor, so he didn't help him. The Levite didn't think he was his neighbor, so he didn't help him. But the Samaritan thought he was his neighbor, understanding, so he helped him. But it's actually the other way around. Who proved to be the neighbor to him? It's very subtle. Did you ever notice that? Who proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands? The one who showed mercy toward him. Go and do the same. Huh? Oh, so what you're saying is I should like people who help me. No. But it gets also back to the notion, love your neighbor as yourself. How would you like to be treated? Treat others as you would like to be treated yourself. if everyone actively sought to be a neighbor to others, we wouldn't have any issues. It's proactive, actually. Be the neighbor, not wait for someone to be your neighbor. Very subtle, but it's different than you expect. Ultimately, who is the neighbor? One's fellow man, fellow woman. What if they're a stranger? What is hospitality? Under Jewish tradition, hospitality was typically afforded. If a traveling Jew was a stranger, you were supposed to, you would offer them to stay in your house because they're your fellow neighbor. You don't know this person, but you showed them hospitality because they were a stranger. Now, you know what? The Greek phrasing for hospitality literally means lover of strangers. Xenophilia. This kind of elevates the whole thing. But remember, this all got back to a legal question. So I ask you now again, was any of these men legally obligated to help the man? Well, and it gets back to maybe not in the way that man shaped it, but if it's the call to love, remember, to him who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, it is sin. James 4:17. They were, as any child of God should be. If you love God and love your neighbor as yourself, it's not a, well, it would be nice if we did this. Well, if it's convenient, I'll do this. It is a call. So that's why that question was so, because everyone's like, no, nothing would happen to them. What would God, if I just sneak past this guy, no one's going to know I'm here, I'm just going to keep going. Who knew that Levite and that priest passed by this man as he was dying? Who would know? God. Whom they claim to venerate and serve. That priest might have been unclean for 7 days if he touched blood, but he did more probably to harm his soul, ignoring this man's need. And that's what he's getting at. That's what he's getting at with this. And that's, again, the lawyer knows he can quote the code, but there's something to it. He's like, I need to justify myself. Well, who's my neighbor? I've really been generous. I've really taken care of people that I know and like. How generous have you been to your fellow man? I think he was, got to define neighbor. Got to define it, because if you're going to make it a broad definition, that changes the whole calculus. And I'm wondering if that's what he was worried about.
Well, yeah, as Jews, they were worried about how to define such specific things in their actions so that they were free to not do things.
Mm-hmm.
A perspective would be, and I'll be a little facetious, please don't hate me. So the man had compassion on the man that overcome robbers on the road from Jericho to Jerusalem, or Jerusalem to Jericho. So just don't go on the road from Jericho to Jerusalem if you want to worry about this.
Yeah, I could see them taking that tack. You avoid the situation so as to not have to deal with the situations.
And we sometimes take that from the
Well, you wonder why the beggars hung out at the gate called Beautiful, because people wanted to pass through it. Yeah. There's a certain cynicism that can enter into it. And you're right. We see a nucleus of this with the Pharisees and how they behaved. It became something worse years later. That's a whole other discussion. But the idea of taking what God commands and finding all kinds of legal loopholes to do the opposite, or at least not have to deal with things. There were people who gave all kinds of money to the temple for its service, and that was supposed to be done to care for the Levites so they'd have a living and could get by. The priest class, who were primarily Sadducees, tended to be pretty well off. It was very weird. The Sanhedrin was very good at taking care of themselves, too. And I guess there's just a certain element of unfortunate reality that goes with that. few minutes left, but I mean, like I said, this can be explored in many different areas. I wanted to really hit that punch of the context, especially of what kicks it off. Who is my neighbor? Well, let me tell you a story. Who proved to be a neighbor of these three men? What? Because again, many times I've heard this, you get that implication of you need to take care of those that are less fortunate and that have problems because they're your neighbors, you got to take care of them. What he's saying is actually be the neighbor to everyone. Take care of orphans and widows. Yep. And they miss the point of what that phrasing is. Orphans and widows throughout the Bible is code for the helpless that can't help themselves. If you're not doing that, there's problems, but that's like baseline, right? But that's actually one of God's common complaints with Israel is perverting justice and stealing from orphans and widows. Any other thoughts, things to explore in this particular one? I know it's one that's pretty familiar. I was hoping we dug into some stuff. Kay? Yep. Yep. True. That is a true element in it. The Samaritan, she's like, doesn't seek any validation. We don't know how the rest of it kind of shakes out because ultimately it's unimportant to the question. But it doesn't, given the character he demonstrates up until that point, it doesn't sound like he is going to give the man a bill or he's going to want him to praise him for everything he did. He just does it. See, that's the thing. If the priest became unclean, he also might get a lot of attention from the crowds for being a good dude. I don't know. He would be concerned with what people would think anyway. Yeah. For saving a Jew, the Pharisees would only care if it was a Sabbath, probably. That's, yeah, but I was, what if it's his son? What if it's a friend? What if it's two priests are going along? One gets beat down, you just leave him? That's true. They wouldn't be traveling. Well, you can travel so far on the Sabbath, but probably not that long. Yeah, they had to measure their steps. They were very particular. Hence being was it the whipping of 39 times instead of 40. That one always makes me laugh. You do it 39 because 40 is the limit, and you do it 39 in case you miscounted. So bureaucratic. All right. Any other thoughts this evening, Stephen?
We were trying to apply where Paul says, I planted and Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. We're having a mix-up on who's to do what, cleaning the kitchen. And the question came up, like Paul says, I planted, but do you think he ever watered as well? And
Sure.
everybody said, yeah. Then did Apollos ever plant? Apollos said. So it's not like we can say, well, Paul only planted, Apollos only watered. I don't know if that ties in. I mean, it's just.
It really comes down to the different types of things. This Samaritan takes care of this man by himself, but there's nothing to say that loving one's neighbor can't be an effort of more than one person too. So yeah, that could be fitting with it. And the ultimate demonstration of love is sharing the gospel. So yeah, I could fit with that in the roles that we have.
And I ended up cleaning the kitchen today.
Jill?
Nobody else did.
Yeah, one of the things that keeps popping in my head, and it popped in during class this morning too, is that our reputation, no matter what people call us or look at us, it's what we do on a daily. You know,
Mhm.
I want people to know who I am by what I do as my reputation. Sometimes I don't come off as nice. Other times I can be very nice. And so, as a Samaritan, he's known for what he was or what they thought he was, but
We don't really know. And it's interesting that he's on a journey, and this is something I'm not aware of. I don't know how common it was for them to leave their area. I would imagine there were several of them that didn't just because of it, and that's why they had their own insular worship at Mount Gerizim, because that would naturally fit, but that doesn't mean everyone. Most of the time people wouldn't journey through there. Now, Christ and the apostles did, and I'd love to have heard the argument on that one. You sure you want to do this? Well, then you wouldn't have met the woman at the well.
You need to remember he was a story. You can't story. I always, within my mind, assumed, the Samaritans weren't traveling, they didn't have a lot. They weren't well off. They weren't, in a culture that's generated for that kind of wealth. So,
They'll always
the
have.
idea of throwing the Samaritan in there to basically inflame his Jewish audience.
To kick it up a notch a little bit, yeah. He works in hyperbole, and this is kind of an example of that in a more, not as crazy way, but yeah, it fits. Any other thoughts? Okay, anyone need Lord's Supper this evening? Any announcements, various things need known? Got, no dinner Wednesday at summer. We'll have singing Devo, same bad time, same bad channel, 6:30 on Wednesday. You have singing, I believe. Okay. Anything else needs mentioned? Okay. Chris, would you close us?
Learn and to apply, Lord. Thank you also for all those that met this evening to put together things for our community and for our congregation. Lord, pray that you bless us.